And then you might come to the conclusion, you know what, this is going nowhere. And I hope this person understands it's going nowhere and move on, okay? The fact of the matter is, and I have to tell you, I watched the Bill Maher segment this morning, and several times I had to just, take a breath because he's such an ignorant sack of shit. It just nauseates me when I'm listening to this. He hasn't a clue what the history is. He really doesn't know anything. This is the reason Bill Maher doesn't want kids to go to college. He says it's a waste of time. Yeah, in college you learn that before you speak your mind, you should actually know a few facts. You're supposed to read books, not just have note cards passed to you. So what are the facts? And I'm perfectly willing now to say to Bill Maher to his face, if you disagree with me, have me on your program. Have me on your program, and we'll go through it step by step. Already as early as 1976. Now, if I'm not mistaken, you were probably born around that time.
A little bit later, but yes.
Okay, later. So before you were born, and I'd like you to sort of let that sink in. You're an adult woman already. You have children. I'm talking about before you were born. Already in 1976, the Palestine Liberation Organization, which at that point was a representative organization of the Palestinian people, was supporting two states on the June 1967 border. They were supporting the compromise. They were already giving up before you were born. The representative organization of the Palestinians, universally recognized, the PLO, they already were ready to compromise. They gave up, and I hope this will sink into the minds of your listeners. It's impossible that it will sink into the mind of Bill Maher because there isn't a mind. There's a blank space that's filled in with desperate attempts of being clever and funny for his paid listeners. But for everybody else, before you were born, the Palestinians had already compromised. They had already moved on. They had given up on 80% of Palestine, the area that became the state of Israel. And they had resigned themselves, reconciled themselves to the prospect of a state just on the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. But the whole area that became Israel, before you were born, they had acquiesced in that reality. Now, there is a question about the fate and future of the Palestinian refugees, those who were expelled. And I will grant, because I am an old-fashioned believer in truth, and as a radical, I like to quote the better part of the radical tradition that says the truth is revolutionary. Namely, there is no contradiction between the truth and having revolutionary or radical aspirations. So I'm not afraid of the truth. It's not like truth is the enemy of revolution or truth is the enemy of a radical transformation of our society and our world. So it is true that this refugee question has been a gray area. But if you look at all the negotiations, and I've studied it very closely, in all the negotiations, it was clear that the Palestinians were willing to, or the representative organizations, were willing to make drastic, colossal compromises on the question of the return of the Palestinian refugees. So any honest reckoning of the factual record will show you that the Palestinians had already compromised, had already given up the aspirations of one state from the river to the sea. Now, if there were any doubts, just let me give you a few examples. So In the 1980s, we're now going ahead. Okay, we're going from 1976 to in the early 1980s. The Palestinians were making it very clear they were ready to compromise on two states in historic Palestine. Their state would only constitute 20%. The Israelis began to panic because they were afraid that international public opinion would force them to relinquish control of the West Bank and Gaza, which they were determined to keep. And so an Israeli political scientist, his name is Avner Yaniv, very mainstream fellow. He's since passed. Actually, I think I'm the only one still alive. Everybody involved in the conflict is dead already. He said, what the Israelis feared, and I'd like this expression hopefully to sink into the minds of your listeners as well. What the Israelis feared was the Palestinian peace offensive. The Palestinian peace offensive. They were terrified that the Palestinians were becoming too moderate, and therefore pressure would be exerted by the international community to force on Israel its withdrawal from the West Bank and Gaza to its pre-June 1967 borders. So what did Israel do? Israel fabricated in June 1982 an excuse to invade Lebanon. Why did it want to invade Lebanon? Because that's where the PLO was located at the time, the Representative Palestinian Organization. They wanted to destroy the PLO, not because it was radical, not because it wanted to create a state from the river to the sea. They wanted to destroy the PLO because it was too moderate. The Palestinian peace offensive, okay? And in the course of that attempt to liquidate the excessively moderate PLO, Israel killed between 15 and 20,000 Palestinian and Lebanese, overwhelmingly civilians. As a matter of fact, this last Israeli genocide in Gaza, it for the first time exceeded the amount of death and destruction since the Lebanon War in 1982. People already have completely forgotten. And what was the cause of the war? Why did Israel kill 15 to 20,000 Palestinian and Lebanese, overwhelmingly civilians? Because of, and Bill Maher, I'll be happy to come on your program, take out Avner Yaniv's book and shove it in front of your face. Now, I know that will be torture. I understand that will be torture, not the phrase, but having to look at a book. Having to look at a book. Now, maybe you think you're protected under the Eighth Amendment against cruel and unusual punishment. Okay, we'll go through that in court. But yes, the Palestinian peace offensive.